They say the Whitmore Mansion plays music at 3:13 every night, despite being abandoned for decades. No one knows where the melody comes from, or who still sits at the piano. But I do, because I was there when Emily Blackwood vanished without a trace, and I still hear her playing. They say that Whitmore Manor on the outskirts of Salem, Massachusetts, holds secrets deeper than its own foundations. No one knows exactly when the rumors began, but the stories always end the same way, with Emily Blackwood, the antique restorer, vanishing in 1998. I wish I could say it's nothing more than an urban legend, but I was on the team that investigated the case. My name is Michael Harrington, retired detective, and this is the one story that still keeps me up at night. The manor had remained sealed for nearly half a century when the Whitmore family, distant descendants of the original owners, decided to catalog the estate for a potential auction. Emily was hired due to her impeccable reputation in restoring Victorian-era items. I have her notes with me, recovered from the manor. The first entry, dated October 3rd, reads, "First impression of Whitmore Manor. Magnificent. The Victorian architecture is exceptionally preserved, despite the house being abandoned for decades. Mr. Whitmore mentioned that no one has lived here since 1950, when his grandmother passed. I've been hired for a 6-week job, cataloging and restoring selected pieces. The most interesting room is the music parlor, with a Steinway piano from 1876 in surprisingly good condition. I can't wait to get started." What Emily didn't know was that the house had chosen her long before she ever received that phone call. The manor sits on an isolated estate, surrounded by a dense grove of century-old oaks. Emily settled into the guest room on the second floor, overlooking the backyard garden, where moss-covered angel statues seemed to watch her every move. The first few weeks passed uneventfully. Emily documented each item meticulously, working methodically from room to room. Her notes were precise, detailed, but on the page dated October 17th, the handwriting changes. It becomes rushed, almost frantic. 3:13 a.m. I woke up to music. Piano. The Steinway. Impossible. I'm alone in the house. I went downstairs, the melody growing louder with each step. A faint light came from the music room. When I entered, the music stopped. The piano was open, as if someone had just been playing. The keys. There was something on the keys. I turned on the light. Blood, or something that looked like it. When I returned with the camera, there was nothing there. Police reports from that time show that Emily called Mr. Whitmore's office the next day. He assured her no one else had access to the property and suggested she might have dreamed it. He offered to send a security guard, but Emily declined. Said she was probably overworked. The following week, her notes reveal a significant shift. Emily began cataloging specific objects that, according to her, carried intense emotional resonance. A porcelain doll that caused a sensation of suffocation. A pocket watch that, when held, created sharp chest pain. A jewelry set that left invisible burn marks on her fingers. The theory Emily developed was far too bizarre for anyone to believe. But after reviewing all the evidence, I can't find a better explanation for what happened. The most fascinating element of the case lies in the dream journals Emily began to keep. She described vivid, recurring dreams, always involving people she had never met, but whose faces she could draw with disturbing accuracy. "Last night, I dreamed of a young woman named Elizabeth. She was sitting at the piano playing a sad melody. Her father stormed into the room furious. They argued about a man named Thomas. He grabbed her by the neck. I could feel the pressure on my own throat choking. When I woke, I had finger marks on my neck." Another entry. William Whitmore, 1879. He was in the library when his heart failed. The pain was unbearable. He collapsed onto the desk, knocking over the inkwell. The pocket watch he held stopped at 3:13. And still. Margaret, 1897. Fire in the bedroom. The perfume was too strong. The lamp fell. Flames climbed her dress, burned alive, screaming for help that never came. The jewelry melted into her skin. Each night at 3:13, Emily relived a different death, and each object she cataloged was connected to one of those deaths. Most disturbing of all, when I searched the city's historical archives, I found records of every one of those deaths, exactly as Emily described them. Elizabeth Whitmore, strangled by her father in 1876 after he discovered her affair with the music teacher Thomas. William Whitmore, sudden death in the library in 1879. Margaret Whitmore died in a fire in 1897. How could Emily have known these details? The records were buried in city archives, not public knowledge. The most plausible theory is that she had done extensive research. But then why subject herself to such torment? And the physical marks on her body? Photos taken by the forensic team show it clearly. Finger marks on her neck consistent with strangulation. Burn marks on her wrists exactly where Margaret wore her bracelets. A bruise on her chest, over the heart, where William felt pain before he died. The fourth week marked a drastic change in Emily's notes. She no longer wrote as an observer but as a participant. Her identity seemed to merge with that of the victims. I am no longer just myself. Part of me is Elizabeth now. I can play the piano perfectly, the same melody she used to play. I've never taken piano lessons, but my fingers move on their own as if they've always known what to do. Later on. Today I tried on Margaret's dress, found in the attic trunk. When I looked in the mirror, I saw her face over mine. I can smell the perfume she wore even though the bottle's been empty for over a century. Security staff hired by Mr. Whitmore, after Emily finally accepted help, reported bizarre behavior. Emily spoke with different accents depending on the day, used outdated expressions, sang Victorian lullabies while working. In one particularly unsettling incident, a guard found her sitting at the piano at exactly 3:13 a.m., playing with flawless technique, though Emily had previously claimed she couldn't play at all. Footage from the security cameras shows something even more disturbing. In several moments, Emily appears to converse with invisible people. In one especially clear recording, she is in the room that once belonged to Elizabeth, fixing her hair in the mirror. But the reflection does not match her movements. Most haunting of all are the audio recordings. In one, a distinctly different female voice, one not belonging to Emily, can be heard saying, "She's almost ready. Soon she'll be one of us completely." It was during the 5th week that Emily made her discovery. Her notes from this time are nearly illegible, written in a feverish rush. The piano is the core. All the deaths are connected to it. Elizabeth died because of it. William had his heart attack while hearing Elizabeth play on a phonograph. Margaret was playing before the fire. And there are others, so many others. All died at 3:13. The piano was built from the wood of the gallows used in the Salem executions. Its strings contain metal melted from the needles used to identify witches. It's a conduit, a bridge between worlds, and it chose me as a channel. Emily was convinced she needed to destroy the piano to break the cycle. Her final notes detailed an elaborate plan to burn the instrument in a specific ritual using salt and dried herbs she had gathered from the garden. On November 7th, Emily dismissed the guards, saying she needed privacy to complete the catalog. They hesitated, but she insisted. The last one left at 10 p.m. The music room's security footage shows Emily entering at 3:10 a.m., carrying a gasoline can and a bag of salt. She pours the contents over the piano, reciting inaudible words. At 3:12, she strikes a match. That's when the inexplicable occurs. The room's doors slam shut violently. The match flame extinguishes on its own. The camera begins to fail, showing only fragments of what happens next. In one frame, Emily is alone. In the next, there are at least 5 figures around her. In another, she's being pulled toward the piano, its lid opening like a hungry mouth. The final frame shows Emily sitting at the piano, but her face is no longer her own. It's a grotesque blend of all the faces she had drawn in her dream journal. At exactly 3:13, the transmission cuts out completely. When the investigation team arrived the next morning, called by Mr. Whitmore after losing contact with Emily, the house was in perfect order. The piano gleamed as if freshly polished. There was no sign of Emily, the gasoline, or the salt. The only evidence that something had occurred were the piano keys, stained with a dark liquid later confirmed to be human blood, Emily's blood. Her journals and notes were found in her room, meticulously organized, as if she knew they would be discovered. as if she wanted her story to be told. The Whitmore family sold the mansion less than a month later. Since then, it has had 7 different owners. None stayed longer than a year. All reported the same phenomenon. Every night at 3:13, the piano plays on its own. The most recent owner, a skeptical parapsychology professor who purchased the house specifically to debunk the rumors, installed high-end recording equipment in the music room. The audio recording perfectly captured the melody played at 3:13, the same unfinished composition Elizabeth was creating when she was killed. Even more disturbing was the video. The quality was pristine, high definition. The piano clearly played by itself, keys moving with no one pressing them. But when the professor zoomed in and enhanced the contrast, something became visible. A translucent female figure sitting at the piano. Her face changed constantly, shifting between different identities. One of the faces was unmistakably that of Emily Blackwood. The manor remains vacant to this day. All the objects Emily cataloged were auctioned off, except the piano, which no one would buy. It still sits in the music room covered by a sheet. Real estate agents showing the property never mention the instrument, and never, ever schedule visits close to 3:13 a.m. As for me, I keep Emily's notes as a reminder of the mystery I was never able to solve. Sometimes, on particularly quiet nights, I swear I can hear a distant melody, as if played on a piano far away. And when I glance at the clock, it inevitably reads 3:13. I don't know if Emily Blackwood was the victim of psychological trauma that drove her to madness, or if she truly encountered something supernatural within that house. What I do know is that, whatever the truth may be, she is now part of the story of Whitmore Manor, a story that keeps repeating night after night, eternally echoing for anyone willing to listen. In the small town of Winter Haven, Maine, Ashwood Manor has stood imposingly atop the hill for more than 150 years. They say the place holds a secret that not even experts in paranormal phenomena can fully explain. Jonathan Hayes, an investigative reporter for the New York Observer, came here to document the story of Robert Sullivan, a paranormal investigator whose work at the manor became legendary in occult circles. Robert arrived at Ashwood Manor after the suspicious deaths of 3 guests over the span of 6 months. What drew him were the bizarre rumors. After each death, witnesses reported the appearance of a room not listed on the original floor plan, the infamous Room 309. And the most disturbing detail, the room vanished once the body was removed. No one could prove the room existed, but everyone knew that when it appeared, someone was marked to die. Desperate due to the deaths and the negative publicity, the manor's owner hired Robert to investigate the phenomenon. What the investigator discovered in the days that followed would forever change the way we understand the relationship between guilt, fear, and the supernatural. Robert Sullivan was known for his skeptical and methodical approach. With degrees in psychology and theoretical physics from Harvard, he developed specialized equipment to detect anomalies in wall structures, temperature fluctuations, and electromagnetic disturbances. The first week at the manor was frustrating. No concrete evidence. But on the 8th day, a family of 4 arrived for the weekend. The Clarks. The father, Michael, a New York banker, appeared visibly stressed. The mother, Elaine, a university professor, seemed distant. The teenage children barely interacted with one another. Robert noticed something disturbing about their behavior, as if each one was trapped in their own world of guilt and regret. That night, Robert heard Michael Clark talking to himself in the hallway. "I swear I saw a room here. 309. It wasn't on the plan they showed me." The next morning, the housekeeper found Michael dead in the bathroom, an apparent heart attack. And then, as had happened before, room 309 appeared, visible to everyone, though no one could open the door. Robert identified a pattern. The room didn't appear randomly. It first manifested only to the next victim, like a calling, a warning, and those who saw it seemed to share one thing in common. All carried some deep, unresolved guilt. When Michael Clark's body was removed, room 309 vanished. The family left shortly after, devastated. Robert intensified his investigation. In the manor's library, he found old diaries belonging to the original owners. the Ashwoods. He discovered that the manor had been built in 1871 by Samuel Ashwood, a physician who conducted unorthodox experiments on psychiatric patients. Samuel believed that intense emotions, especially guilt and remorse, created an energy capable of altering the fabric of reality. His experiments aimed to channel this energy to create introspection portals, physical spaces where a person would be forced to confront their inner demons. The experiments were shut down when several patients died, apparently of natural causes, but always after reporting the appearance of an additional room in the manor's east wing. Most disturbing of all, Robert discovered old photographs of the manor showing that the space where room 309 occasionally appeared was originally an experiment chamber. Samuel Ashwood left notes about his final theory, that he had created not just a physical space, but an architectural manifestation of the human subconscious, a room that existed simultaneously on the physical and mental planes, accessible only to those whose burden of guilt created an emotional resonance with the place. 2 weeks later, a new group arrived at the manor, participants in a meditation retreat. Among them was Sarah Connolly, an emergency physician suffering from burnout and depression. On the first night, she woke everyone with her screams. She claimed to have seen a room at the end of the hallway that hadn't been there before, room 309. When the others went to check, there was nothing. But Robert knew it was only a matter of time. He tried to talk to Sarah to understand what might be causing the resonance. She was initially reluctant, but eventually revealed a secret. 6 months earlier, she had lost a young patient on the operating table due to an error that could have been avoided if she hadn't been so exhausted from overworking. Robert recognized the signs. Sarah was being called by the room. The next day, Robert installed cameras in the hallway. That night, the footage showed Sarah sleepwalking to the end of the corridor, stopping in front of a solid wall and speaking to someone invisible. "I know I failed. I know you're here because of me." In the footage, she was talking to an empty wall. But on the audio recordings, Robert captured voices responding. Voices that shouldn't have been there. More disturbing still was when a child's voice specifically called for Robert. "You'll need to come too, Robert. You know what you did?" Robert was stunned. The room somehow knew his own past, his own buried guilt. Robert decided he needed to break the cycle. His theory: room 309 was a kind of psychic trap. It appeared to emotionally vulnerable individuals, amplified their guilt to an unbearable level, and somehow drained their life force at the moment of final confrontation. He needed to intervene before Sarah Connolly became the next victim. On the third night, Robert witnessed the impossible. While monitoring the cameras, he saw a door materialize on a wall where there had previously been nothing. Room 309 had fully manifested. Minutes later, Sarah left her room, walking as if in a trance toward the newly formed door. Robert ran through the corridors, intercepting her just as she reached for the doorknob. "Sarah, you don't need to go in. It's not real." But then Robert saw, through the slightly open door, what was calling Sarah, a boy of about 12, pale as death, reaching out his hand. "It's Jason," Sarah whispered. "The patient I lost." In that moment, Robert truly understood the nature of the room. It wasn't just a manifestation of guilt, but a bridge between worlds, a fragile membrane between life and death where our regrets took form. Robert made a decision that would change everything. He pushed Sarah away from the door and entered in her place. What happened inside room 309 during the 7 hours Robert Sullivan remained there, no one knows for sure. Guests and staff reported hearing voices, screams, and crying from within, though the door had become impenetrable and invisible to all but Robert. When he finally emerged the next morning, he was physically exhausted, but strangely at peace. Sarah Connolly was found sleeping in her bed, with no memory of the previous night's events. Robert refused to speak about his experience inside the room, but he did 2 things before leaving Ashwood Manor. First, he wrote an extensive report, sealed it in an envelope, and gave it to the owner with instructions to open it only if room 309 reappeared. Second, he requested to install a small memorial in the manor's garden, a simple plaque with the names of 3 children, Emma, Lily, and Thomas. Years later, when Robert passed away peacefully in his sleep at his home in Boston, strange news reached Winter Haven. On the night of his death, all guests at Ashwood Manor reported seeing an extra door in the east corridor, room 309, which vanished the next morning. And even stranger, when the executor of his will opened Robert's home, they found that the layout of his apartment had been mysteriously altered. Where there was once an office, now stood an additional room with a numbered door, 309. Inside, nothing but 3 framed photographs of smiling children and an open journal on the last page, with a single sentence written, "The room is not about death. It's about reconciliation." The true story of Robert Sullivan and room 309 was never fully understood, but those who study the case believe he discovered something fundamental about the nature of human guilt, and may have found a way to use the room not as a sentence, but as a redemption. They say Michael Bennett never imagined that a simple letter would change the course of his life. He was finishing his shift at the Boston bookstore when the envelope sealed with an old crest arrived in his hands. A law firm summoned him for the reading of the will of a great-uncle he didn't even know existed, Roland Bennett, who had died at 97 in the small town of Ravenwood, Massachusetts. They say that Michael, 27, orphaned since his teenage years and without any close relatives, saw in that summons the promise of a connection to his lost roots. After all, what harm could there be in learning about his family's history? The young man left the next day, driving along the coastal road toward Ravenwood, a town that didn't appear on any modern GPS app. Locals still remember Michael's arrival, the outsider in jeans and a t-shirt who stood out from the stiff, closed-off community. They say when he asked about the Bennett mansion at the gas station, the elderly attendant turned pale, subtly made the sign of the cross, and mumbled directions to the hilltop property, visible even from afar, a Gothic silhouette carved against the cloudy sky. "The house has been waiting for you a long time," said lawyer Elliot Graves, a man of indeterminate age, as he greeted him at the mansion entrance that afternoon. "You are the last of the Bennetts." The reading of the will took place in the mansion's dusty library, under the watchful eyes of ancestors in yellowed portraits. Elliot Graves delivered the terms of the document with unsettling formality. Michael Bennett would inherit the entire family fortune, the ancestral mansion, the surrounding lands, and old investments that amounted to a considerable sum. But there was one condition. He had to reside on the property, becoming its guardian. "You must understand, Mr. Bennett," Graves explained. "This house is not just a property. It is the repository of your family's history. Your presence here is essential." They say Michael laughed, thinking the demand a small price to pay for his sudden fortune. After all, trading his cramped Boston apartment for a historic mansion felt more like a blessing than a burden. The young man signed the documents without hesitation, ignoring the enigmatic expression on the lawyer's face. People in town say that on his first night, Michael explored the labyrinthine hallways of the mansion, finding rooms frozen in time. In the basement, he found a locked room the lawyer hadn't mentioned. The key was in a nearby drawer, as if someone had ensured he would find it. Inside was an old projector and dozens of film reels, meticulously dated and spanning decades, all labeled with names from the Bennett family. Family accounts. Read the first reel, dated 1923. Curious, Michael decided to watch. The black and white images revealed a man in a suit, sitting in a chair in the very same library where Michael had been hours earlier. The man looked tensely into the camera as he explained his role as guardian of the Bennett mansion. As Michael progressed through the films, a disturbing pattern emerged. Each guardian began optimistic, reporting discoveries about the mansion and family history. But inevitably, their testimonies grew erratic, paranoid. The final film, recorded by his great-uncle Roland, just a month before his death, showed an old man staring into the camera with hollow eyes. "I couldn't escape. Now it's your turn, Michael, forgive me." The oldest residents of Ravenwood still remember Michael's first weeks in the mansion. At first, he was seen in town, buying supplies and trying to talk to locals about the Bennett family history. But people looked away, changed the subject. "That family was always different," they whispered. "Some things are better left alone." In the third week, Michael made a significant discovery in the studio on the top floor. Behind an old tapestry, he found an entrance to a narrow corridor that snaked between the walls of the mansion. The passage led to a hidden chamber, where a massive family tree was carved directly into the dark wood paneling. The names of the Bennetts, hundreds of them, formed intricate branches stretching back centuries. Next to each name was a small symbol, the same crest that had sealed the letter that changed his life. Michael traced the branches with his fingers until he found his own name, the last of the lineage, freshly etched into the wood. The ink still seemed wet. That night, they say Michael dreamed of all the previous guardians. They stood in a circle around him, watching silently. When he awoke, he found dirt-stained handprints on his bedsheet. From then on, Michael threw himself obsessively into studying the family archives. Diaries from previous guardians revealed fragments of a dark history that traced back to Ravenwood's founding. The Bennetts had been the first European settlers in the region in 1647. To secure their dominion, they made a pact with something ancient that dwelled in the land. In exchange for prosperity and longevity, they offered a sacrifice. Eternally, a Bennett would serve as guardian of the mansion, a voluntary prisoner, destined to gradually lose their sanity while feeding the entity with their fear and despair. "It's a symbiosis," wrote one of the guardians in 1887. "The house feeds on us, and we become part of it. There is no escape, only acceptance." They say that after a month in the mansion, Michael began to show the same signs as his predecessors. Residents who saw him during rare visits to town described a sickly young man with deep eye bags and trembling hands. He mumbled to himself and constantly looked over his shoulder, as if being followed. Around that time, Michael discovered the true nature of the curse. It wasn't just madness, it was transformation. Each guardian, over time, gradually fused with the property. The process began with small changes: veins that looked like roots beneath the skin, fingernails resembling tree bark, dreams of being trapped in wood. In the final phase, the guardian would literally become part of the house, their consciousness trapped in the walls, adding another voice to the whispers that filled the mansion. Michael began recording his own family accounts, documenting his deterioration. "I can feel the house in my mind," he recorded on day 20. "Sometimes I wake up and I don't know where I end and the walls begin." In his growing despair, Michael found mentions of previous attempts to break the curse. One guardian in 1789 tried to demolish the mansion, but every worker either quit inexplicably or suffered fatal accidents. Another, in 1856, tried to flee to Europe, but the ship sank, and he was the sole survivor, washed ashore in Ravenwood. A third, in 1912, committed suicide, only to awaken in the mansion the next day, as if nothing had happened. There was, however, a consistent clue in the accounts. The family tree in the secret chamber seemed to be the epicenter of the pact. Some guardians theorized that destroying it might sever the link. That's when Michael had his epiphany. If the curse passed through the family line, perhaps the solution was to eliminate the lineage. As the last Bennett, if he could destroy the family tree and ensure there were no heirs, maybe the entity would be left without a vessel. On the night he chose for his plan, a violent storm battered Ravenwood. Lightning cut the sky, briefly illuminating the dark corridors of the Bennett mansion as Michael prepared. He had studied purification rituals in ancient texts found in the library, combining elements from various traditions in hopes of strengthening his attack against the curse. They say he carried a bucket filled with a mixture of salt, consecrated oil, and his own blood, ingredients mentioned in a 1723 diary as substances antagonistic to the pact. In his pocket, an old lighter passed down through generations of Bennetts. The path to the secret chamber had never felt so long. The floorboards groaned beneath his feet, not like normal wood, but like living beings in pain. The shadows on the walls twisted and reached for him. Voices whispered in his ears, all the past guardians, begging him to stop. "You'll only make it worse," warned a female voice he recognized from a 1957 film. "Some pacts cannot be broken," rasped another male from 1892. When Michael finally reached the family tree chamber, he found it transformed. The wood pulsed as if a heartbeat within it. The etched names glowed faintly, and from his own name oozed a dark red liquid, like sap or blood. With trembling hands, Michael poured the mixture over the base of the carved tree, reciting the words of the ritual he had memorized. The wood hissed on contact with the liquid, releasing a pungent smoke. The voices around him intensified, turning to screams. The entire mansion seemed to shake. "You trapped me, but I'll be the last," Michael shouted, striking the lighter. "This ends now." The flame touched the mixture-soaked wood, and instantly a greenish-blue fire spread across the tree. The names burned one by one, reduced to ashes floating like black moths in the air. The mansion's walls trembled violently, cracks appearing in the ceiling and floor. Michael watched in triumph as the tree burned. When the flames reached his own name, the last of the line, he felt a piercing pain in his chest. He fell to his knees, vision darkening as a supernatural wind swirled around him. "I won," were his final words before darkness consumed him completely. The story that reaches us ends with the events of the next morning. The violent storm that had ravaged Ravenwood was gone, leaving the sky clear and the air strangely still. The Bennett mansion stood tall on the hilltop, seemingly untouched, as if nothing had happened. Elliot Graves, the family lawyer, climbed the hill accompanied by the local sheriff and a doctor. They had been alerted by residents who saw strange lights and heard screams from the mansion during the night. They found Michael Bennett lying unconscious in his room. When the doctor examined him, he noticed something disturbing. Dark veins branching beneath his skin like roots, forming patterns resembling tree branches. The young man was breathing, but when he briefly opened his eyes, they were blank and distant. "He'll live," said the doctor, "but I can't say if his mind will return." As they cared for Michael, Elliot Graves quietly made his way to the secret chamber. The family tree was there, intact, showing no sign of fire or damage. Michael's name was still etched, now marked with a small symbol indicating his official status as guardian. And below it, a blank space, waiting for the next Bennett. The lawyer sighed. It was always the same. Each guardian believed they could break the cycle, and each one failed. Some tried to flee, others to fight. But the result was always the same. The entity always won. Michael Bennett was admitted to the psychiatric wing of St. Mary's Hospital, where he remains to this day, alternating between catatonic states and frantic episodes in which he begs to be freed. Not from the hospital, but from the mansion he believes he still inhabits. His case baffles doctors. His body appears to be gradually transforming, human cells giving way to fibers eerily resembling wood. The Bennett mansion still stands atop the hill in Ravenwood, waiting. Locals avoid looking at it when they pass. Sometimes, on stormy nights, lights can be seen moving behind the windows, though no one officially lives there. And occasionally, visitors to the town swear they hear a young man's voice calling from the shadows, offering secrets to those brave enough to enter. The voice of a man who believed he could be the last of a cursed lineage, unaware that the true curse was the illusion of escape. They say that with each generation, someone always comes to claim the property. A distant relative, a forgotten heir, and Elliot Graves, who never seems to age, is always there to conduct the reading of the will. The cycle continues, as it has for nearly 400 years. The family tree in the secret chamber grows a little more, and the entity feeds.